challenging the status quo, the courage to take paths less traveled, and the willingness to immerse in the shared truths of our vulnerabilities. It makes philanthropy work for communities, not for privilege. It calls for nurturing trust and radical kindness, the empathy to explore possibilities, and the humility to accept these in our oneness. It's the fierce ambition to be uncompromising, to satiate the hunger for learning, and to have the audacity to amplify the most vulnerable of voices. It requires perseverance, intelligence, and gusto, true moral courage for sustenance. It inspires leadership that adjusts the sails to catch the wind, to imagine possibilities in pursuit of a higher purpose bigger than ourselves, but that together is surmountable. Dasra, it combines the power of the mind and the courage of the heart to tackle large-scale inequities, building an India that we all deserve, thriving with dignity and equity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dasra Philanthropy Week 2023. We're glad to have you all join us today, and thank you for taking out the time. My name is Sneha, and I'll be your moderator for the session. Dasra Philanthropy Week is currently in its 14th edition and has always stood as a platform to bring together diverse stakeholders and voices from the development ecosystem to convene, converse, and continue sustained action towards the quest for 1 billion Indians to thrive with dignity and equity. We're delighted to share this edition is hosting 40 plus sessions across diverse themes, hearing voices from over 100 plus thought leaders, and having more than 2,000 attendees tune in live and virtual sessions. This is the most extensive spread of programming we've ever had at DPW, and are really excited about the lineup of thought leaders and sessions that we have today. Welcome to the session, Going Platinum, Past, Present, and Future of Civil Society in India at 75. This session is being held in partnership with CSO. India's civil society has contributed to our nation in many ways. From the provisions of the RTE, the National Eradication Programs for polio, and interventions like the ASHA workers, all can trace their beginnings to the efforts of our civil society. A glimpse of the CSO at 75 report was shared at the Jaipur Literature Festival earlier this year. And like the report, we really hope to use today's discussion to pause, reflect, and above all, celebrate our contribution as a civil society to India's development. We hope to have a great discussion on what lies ahead. And joining me today are our distinguished panelists. Please allow me the opportunity to introduce you to Sanjoy Roy. Sanjoy is a managing director of Teamwork Arts and founder trustee at the Salam Balak Trust. Through his work, he has helped integrate performing arts and theater into social action. Ms. Farida Lambe ji, Farida Lambe, co-founded Pratham in 1995. With 25 years of experience as an education and social activist, she's the head of the Pratham Council for Vulnerable Children. She's a member of the state and central commissions for preventing child labor and has spearheaded initiatives to protect the rights of sex workers and youth. Aditya Natraj. Aditya ji is the CEO of Piramal Foundation, which works in the areas of education, healthcare, livelihood creation, and youth empowerment. With nearly 2 decades of experience in the social development sector, his work focuses on cultivating talent in education leadership at the grassroots. Preeti Patkar. Preeti Tai has spent 33 years working at the intersection of child protection and gender. She's a co-founder of Prerna, a non-profit that works relentlessly to end intergenerational trafficking by protecting vulnerable children from exploitation and safeguarding their rights. And last but not the least, Pushpa Aman Singh. Pushpa ji is the founder of GuideStar India. After 18 years of scaling innovative organizations, including running Give India as its COO, she founded GuideStar India in 2009. Pushpa ji has a decade of experience in the financial services sector. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today. If we can very quickly begin with Sanjoy ji. Sanjoy, tell us a little bit about the CSO at 75 Coalition, its genesis, and really what is the impact it has had, and why did you really start this coalition and this report?
Thank you, Sneha, and thank you, Dasra, and many congratulations on this year's edition. I do hope that you all are able to build strength by strength going forward. It's a much needed initiative, so many congratulations. You know, one of the problems that we've been having in the NPO or the NGO sector is there's a growing distrust between government stakeholders and the NGO sector. There's a feeling that the NGO sector is critical of the present narrative, and that we, in many ways, don't sort of support government in its many initiatives. What we've set up to do as this loose coalition is really to look at how the NGO sector has been able to contribute across 75 years and across sectoral divides. I think it's the only sector where you don't have to have a reservation for women, caste-based reservations, people with disabilities. These are things that cut across our sector irrespective. Yes, there's a feeling that it's difficult to enumerate the actual value of what this sector brings to the table, because as we all know, development is not necessarily just an hour's job, or the result is not necessarily evident at the end of 1 week or 1 month or 1 year. Development goals are long-term. Development itself needs to be measured long-term, and there's no real measurement yet. Despite that, what we wanted to do is sort of enumerate what are the good practices, what are the areas that the NGO sector has very effectively been able to intervene and create good practices in. What exactly does this sector mean in terms of numbers of people? What is the value that this sector contributes to GDP? It's been valued in the same way that the sector is valued in different parts of the world. But more importantly, to showcase that collectively with the NGO sector, the government, the corporate sector, and all key stakeholders, if we march together, if we walk the talk together, we are going to be able to do much more. We are going to be able to achieve the SDG goals and all the other goals set out, but we need to do it collectively in collaboration.
Thanks, Sanjoy, for that really powerful note. And really excited to learn about what the report kind of has found. But that's when I'd kind of like to invite Pushpa ji. Pushpa, if you could share a little bit on what has been your experience of working with nonprofits over the years, and also specifically what have been some of your findings, quick research notes from this exercise.
Thanks, Neha, and thanks to Sanjoy for kind of giving the context of the background against which, you know, the coalition came together. And I'm so happy to say that I've been working with Sanjay and this group of 14, 15 organizations over the last few months. Typically, you know, within nonprofit work, we've been doing this like another nonprofit piece that goes on the weekends, check-ins and stuff. So in my 2 decades in this sector, when I was at Give India and then set up GuideStar, what's starkly different from the corporate sector is everyone not just opens up their hearts, but also their books. And I, for one, have never had an issue in getting data from people when we ask. In fact, I feel people are very trusting, right? But where the difficulty has been is, like Sanjay said, coming together, adding up, you know, what everyone is reporting. Yeah, it's hard to report, but there are lots of individual organizational information that's out there. Like we have nearly 12,000 organizations on GuideStar voluntarily putting out different levels of information. But I don't have a dashboard where I can just click a button and say, this is what the total of 12,000 NGOs is, because our indicators are different, how we measure is different. So every time we say, and when I was with Venkat in Give India also, we said, let's try and put together impact measurement, and then we would take 5 steps backward, saying we just can't add these up. But with this effort that Sanjay, Matthew, and others have kind of brought us all together, what we've tried to do is, let's try, and if we have to support this narrative, if in this Amrit Kal of India, like I said yesterday at DPW, if our work is not being celebrated, it's because it's not known, so it's not considered, so it's not celebrated, right? And one of the fallouts is, therefore, our trust is questioned at every level. And the mission of my life in this sector has been to promote trust and transparency. And even after 2 decades, it looks like every morning, whether it's from gathering resources or delivering results or reporting it, we're just being questioned. And the ease of doing good, my God, we are nowhere there. It's just getting more and more difficult. So what this kind of study has done is, we have 3 components. Like Sanjay said, however difficult it is, SSCR, a nonprofit think tank in Delhi, has kind of tried to look at all the national accounts data. Much of it is in public domain. And how do we then kind of come up with a conservative estimate of what the sector contributes? And they've said that we contribute 1.94% of the GDP. And, in contrast, the mining sector is about 2.45%. The IT sector is 7.4%. So the other day at a workshop, I was saying, we feel we are very small and insignificant. Not. When the IT sector says 7.4%, within clicks of a few buttons, they can put out that number. Whereas for us, majority of the people are volunteers. They are paid at very deep discount to their market values. And we have donated assets, or assets that far outlive their regular life in the corporate space, with all the jugaad that we do in this sector. So many of our expenses, we don't even incur, it's in kind. For example, the portal that I run, that's, the technical costs are a gift to me, and that forms the bulk of my expenses. So with all this, when we say 1.94%, it's definitely bigger than that. And in terms of gross value added also, they have tried to put out a number, which is 3,56,000 crore rupees. In other terms, if we have an international audience here, it's roughly about 43 billion USD, right? And that by no means is small. And if we start kind of computing, tracking, refining this, I think we will be able to kind of start saying confidently, even if I'm a small nonprofit working in Kalimpong, when I'm talking to the district magistrate, I can say I'm one of those who bring in, nearly 2% of the GDP. And if you want to know, should I kind of unpack the findings a bit at this point and tell you what the sector looks like in terms of numbers?
I think it'll be great to go over a quick glimpse, Pushpaji.
Okay. So, we all constantly hear about the 3.3 million organizations that the government's MOSPI report put out in 2012. And really what CSOI 2575, the coalition that we are, has done is 10 years after that kind of tried to bring together the data of the sector. And we all know that NITI Aayog's Darpan puts today about 160,000 NGOs information. The income tax put out a recent list on tax exempt NGOs, 2.52 lakhs, ATGs with about 1.64. On FCRA, we know that currently the live NGOs are about 16,500. But what we've tried to do is reach out to 200,000 NGOs through a primary survey to get data ground up. And all the coalition members kind of put in their effort to reach out. And we would be happy. We are now in phase 2. And I'm going to talk based on preliminary results of phase 1. And we had Professor Ankur Sareen and the IIM Ahmedabad research team that worked with us on the analysis and the design of the survey. So broadly, what we find is 5 states of India account for 50% of nonprofits in the country. And these are Delhi, UP, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, right? The other thing that we find in terms of composition of size, 50% of NGOs have an annual spending less than 50 lakh rupees. If you move that to 1 crore, it becomes 62%, right? And then 1 to 5 crores is about, again, another 18%. So 5 crore plus NGOs are 17%. vast majority, 62% are less than 1 crore. So when it is regulators, funders, they can decide where they want to play in terms of providing capacity building, where they want to play in terms of providing, the regulation. Let us not look at this entire sector as if it's like one big size standard. It is not. And I think this is one critical data point about the dimension of the sector that I would really urge everyone to look at. So let's not make the reporting requirements same, for a 50 lakh or less than 1 crore NGO. What Aditya can report for others, for his work, maybe an NGO that is less than 50 lakh is not in a position to do that. So we just need to be mindful. I think I thought, let me put out just these two statistics at this point. And in terms of the UN SDG goals, the people are working across all the goals, but the most popular ones, or where majority of the work is happening, is good education, quality healthcare, no poverty, and gender equality. These have emerged as the most common themes where people are working at. I'll kind of stop there for now and maybe touch upon things at other times. Thank you.
Thanks, Pushpa. I think that's really helpful. I think since you tagged Aditya ji anyways, I'm going to call on him to really, backed by that 43 billion USD number. What does this sector really look like today, right? Where was it in the past? What have been some of your key learnings, reflections, and insights on how the sector has really grown?
Yeah, thank you, Sneha, for this invitation and really wonderful setup. Pushpa, thank you for your leadership as usual. Sanjoy, thank you for bringing this coalition together. I think we were waiting for something like this to happen as a sector, but everyone was waiting for somebody else. So thank you for taking the leadership on this. Sneha, I've been in the sector for 20 years now. And when I joined the sector 20 years ago, the first report I actually read was a NGO I joined education from the corporate sector. The first report I actually read was from a coalition of civil society organizations called the Probe Report, which actually spoke about why children were not in school and whether their parents wanted it or not. And that's what I read. It wasn't a government report, right? I read a lot of UNDP stuff, and then I read a lot of civil society stuff. That's how I learned about the sector. And when I look back at the last 20 years, if I look at 5 or 6 key things that have happened in education, almost each one of them started because an NGO or a group of NGOs picked that up as a problem, right? So there was a whole movement in Rajasthan for children to start going to school. That slowly became Lok Jumbish. That then became the district primary education program funded by the World Bank. And that finally became Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which now we think, oh, of course, the government created Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. But what about the early work that happened before that, right? Similarly, if you look at the National Curriculum Framework in education, there were organizations like Digantar, which had worked for 20, 30 years, which then finally went into the National Curriculum Framework Curriculum Committee, and then became really one of the most progressive curriculum frameworks in the world. So again, that came out from an NGO. Even if you look at the Right to Education Act, right, there was a huge coalition called NAFRE, the National Association for the Fundamental Right to Education. Over 7,000 organizations came together, did a lot of work as to the economic value of education, social value of education, and did a whole bunch of lobbying. And that's how that came in. Then, of course, Farida is on this call. One of the most critical things, ASAR, which came out and said, okay, now children are in school, but they're not learning. ASAR came out. In those days, I was also part of ASAR. And now ASAR has evolved into a government agency itself called Parak, which runs its own assessments. The National Achievement Survey is run. So the government started looking at its own data rather than just NGOs sort of reporting on this, right? And the work like Read India and others that Pratham did is what has now evolved into Nipun and into the foundational literacy mission. So across the board, almost everything that exists, your curriculum framework, your financing framework, your learning quality, your assessments, your programs, everything has come from innovation that CSOs have done. Just because CSOs don't bother about advertising it and focus on doing the work and celebrating the fact that children are getting better, women are getting better, I think we've not been good at communicating that. And this is not just in education. I mean, if you look at health, the work that Dr. Abhay Bang did became the ASHA workers, which is now such a ubiquitous solution in India and is being tom-tommed across the world. The work that Pradhan did became the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. The work that Aruna Bankar Roy did became the Right to Information Act. Work that people like us have done by starting the Gandhi Fellowship now across the board, governments run fellowships and we are the back end for those fellowships. But we learned how to mobilize young people to be involved in India's development. And the same can be said for people with disabilities, adoption rules. All these have come from civil society action. So I think it's really critical to recognize, and the starting of the action to the enabling of the law to the final execution is a 20-year journey. So sometimes we see only the last 3 years and say, hey, fantastic government scheme. But you don't see 20 years ago, someone said this is a problem and started the work. And that's really creditable. So I think it's enormous work by the CSO sector.
Thank you so much, Aditya, for really taking us back into the origins of where all these programs really began. And thank you for also setting it up for me to actually bring Farida ji in to talk a little bit about how programs like ASAR really started. How did Pratham and you really start the idea of building evidence, communicating evidence? ASAR is always quoted everywhere whenever you talk about education, but it started somewhere. And we still actually hear a lot of those questions today, right? What is the evidence of impact? I think it'll be great for you to reflect a little bit based on your really wide experience of working in the sector on how that really came about for you.
Yeah, thank you, Sneha. Thank you, Dasra. Lovely to see Aditya, Preeti, Pushpa all on this call. Basically, I think I just want to reinforce what Aditya just said, that it's a pity that we have not been able to actually publicly say that we have done it. It's not only about Pratham, it is all the aspects which Aditya actually talked about. And I just want to add one or two more to it. If you really look at the entire child line scheme, which is the 1098, that got started in Tata Institute and by a group of people. And it's become the most popular and the most important scheme. And so is ICDA. So I think there is complete merit to what Aditya is saying. Having said that, when you're looking at ASAR, and ASAR is now acclaimed as one of the very important evidence-based document on the learning outcome, I think as Pratham also, we had to take it a little bit of a, when we talk about it, we had to take it gradually. We couldn't jump into the learning outcomes, to tell you the truth. We were looking at attendance, we were looking at enrollment, and that was the issue then. So as NGOs, as civil society, one always looks at the problem, one identifies the problem, and one also sees the relevance. So first 10 years of our existence, we were looking at enrollment, we were looking at value for education. It was, I think, this is where we learned that value of education, that India is changing, parents are changing, there are lots of aspirations of poor parents, and the parents also want their children to get educated. But one of the major crises was, learning outcomes and learning crisis. So I think it was just it was one of the challenges. And I think as Pratham, we've taken the challenge when the Deputy Planning Commission Commissioner told us that, why can't you do a survey? You talk too much, that children are not learning. So we said, fine, we will do it. And that's how actually ASAR began with, 600,000, children to be tested. And I think the questions then, I think it has been a hard journey. It has not been easy. And one of the achievements I would say is that the government accepted that there is an issue of learning crisis. The moment an organization accepts the issue, half the battle is won. And it took us 10 years to make the government understand and accept the issue. Also, I think as ASAR and as Pratham, we've always said that we're identifying, we're giving you the diagnosis. It's not a blame game, but we are also not offering you solutions, but we are demonstrating the solutions which change can happen. And I think over the years, we've been able, Aditya talked about Read India, Aditya's talked about, Nipun Bharat now. I think over the years, we kind of focused that we will not look here and there, we will only look at learning outcomes. So I think one of my learning in Pratham and even as College of Social Work is that if you're focused and if you are very focused about what you want, how to get there, I think things happen. Finally, I just want to say that with the governments, means they are also changing. The system is also changing. There are young officers in the government who want to do something. And I think that's a new one from my past experience, that the government is now asking you. And I think this entire emphasis now on early childhood care, early years. It has taken 20 years for people to realize that you need to, have the early years as very important segment. And I'm happy that now with Nipun Bharat and education policy, this has happened. Lastly, I just want to say that I think the people here on this call and many people who are not here, I think we've achieved this. And I'm saying this is an achievement because we have stayed on the ground, we've demonstrated, we've piloted, we've replicated, and we've tried to operationalize what we learned into a policy and vice versa. So I think that's an important learning that as NGOs, how do you actually operationalize what you learn on the ground and convert it into policy? I want to stop here because I'm sure the others want to speak. So I think that has been my major learning.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Farida ji, and thank you everyone for the work that you really do. But I'd love to actually bring Preeti Tai into the conversation. And Preeti Tai, you spoke about, we've spoken about the government as a stakeholder. We've spoken about the nonprofits as a part of civil society. I think one of the stakeholders that we don't often talk about are our communities. As you know, a nonprofit leader that works on a very complex issue, what has been your sort of interaction with the community? How have you engaged with the communities and how have they really contributed to the journey of civil society? I think that'll be great to hear.
Thank you. Thanks, Neha, and thanks, Dasra, for inviting me. And I think I should have been a participant and not a panelist. There's so much for me to learn. Loved listening to each of the earlier speakers. I think, we've always, we've seen a few trends in involvement of communities, from one trend being this is my community, being very possessive about the community, to moving on to saying this is our community. And, very recently, I think we are moving more towards talking about the community and giving them the autonomy and believing that communities have the power to take care of themselves. And I, having worked in the anti-human trafficking space and child protection space, I think, moving forward, civil society's role should be more focused on involving the communities and involving different stakeholders within the communities. So in the past, at least, where child protection was concerned, I think we depended a lot on either the family, the individual, the child, or within our systems, those who directly address child protection system. Just to give you an example, civil societies, forever wanted to work with the Department of Women and Child. I think, COVID, at least for us in Prerna, what COVID taught us and what we, learned was that we need to involve other stakeholders as well, not just go to those classical stakeholders whose full-time whose full-time responsibility and job is to look at child protection and women's issues. So we moved on to looking at local political parties, most untouched. I think we, as a civil society organization, really shy away from engaging with them and getting involved and putting, child protection onto their agenda. I think for us, we are realizing, and it's just the last 3 years, okay, we're realizing that involving them also leads to your end goal of sustainability. Also, the other stakeholders, like we involved a lot of faith-based organizations in the community, put the agenda of child protection onto them. Just, taking the issue of begging, involving places of worship and telling them that they need to take cognizance of the fact that children are begging outside their premises, and how is it that they can get more involved rather than just being a bystander and saying, this is how the situation is going to remain forever. Also, a lot of informal, groups like the Yuva Mandals, the self-help group women, the women's groups within the community. I think all these stakeholders for us have been extremely relevant. And along with that, helping communities and all the stakeholders understand the need to move from a very welfareist approach to a more focused, right-based and development approach. I think this is what we've been trying to do. And we also feel that as civil society organizations, we should all slowly start moving towards giving more responsibility to communities, believing that communities can take care of themselves, and seeing where our role is, and also finally also defining what our exit plan is going to be. I think as civil societies, while working in communities, we do not have an exit plan. And what does that look like? Are we even discussing an exit plan? And I think we'll start discussing and believing in exit plan the day we believe that communities can take care of themselves, after a certain point of support that they much require. I think this is the way forward for us to move. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Preeti Tai, for bringing that really critical stakeholder, the community, and just talking about exit plans. I think COVID has definitely taught us as a community that we do need to have at least backup plans, if not exit plans. But I'd love to bring Pushpa back into the conversation. And Pushpa, I know we talk about two buzzwords a lot: transparency and legitimacy. We talk about it a lot. Guidestein works with this day in and day out. What has been your experience? I know when we spoke earlier, you referred to the fact that it's not a one size fits all. All organizations are different. And I know you touched upon it briefly, but if you can just elaborate on what your experience really has been and where we are at today, really, in terms of these two aspects.
Yeah. And, just before I come into that, I was struck by what Aditya and Farida ji talked about. It takes 20 years. And I just want to bring in a data point here from our survey that half the organizations in the sector, as per our sample, are younger than 20 years. And 82% are younger than 30 years. So some ways, for the results to show and to start talking about exit plans, etc., I think that's where the understanding of these kinds of, the dimensions of the sector also helps us. Maybe those 20-odd% who are more than this size, 18 to 20% who are more than 30 years old, maybe those are the organizations we need to reach out to and have these pointed conversations. So I guess our survey somewhere helps us also to kind of internally for us within the sector to be able to see our TG or target segment and kind of work in a coordinated fashion and amplify some of these things. So coming back to the trust and transparency thing, our survey also had questions around systems of accountability where we are today. And 84% organizations in the sample actually said that they have their governing body information in the public domain, right? And for me, that's an important indicator. So in a sense, they're saying these are the people who take responsibility for our organization. You can reach out to them and ask questions. Again, another data point that we saw was that 77% of organizations get their accounts audited and share it in the public domain. The law doesn't require them to do. Income tax still treats non-profit accounts in India as a private document, contrary to what the US requires of Form 990s, which are public documents for 501c3s. In India, voluntarily 77% NGOs say that they put it in public domain. Another point I want to share is in our survey, we asked, do you, for your top 3 programs, are you tracking your reach? How many people you touch? We're not even going towards, the output or the outcome, like Farida ji said. First of all, how many enrollments and what's the attendance is the key question. So how many kids have you even enrolled? That kind of data. 65% organizations said that they do track for all top 3 programs of the organization. 84% of them said you can actually independently verify it. So to me, what the survey actually threw up is that a large number of organizations do have fairly advanced and open levels of transparency, but the trust is not coming because, like even Farida ji said, perhaps we are not able to communicate. And even if they have put it out in public domain, we are not able to bring the traffic to look at it, right? And so later when you talk about collectives and collaborations, maybe I want to talk a bit about that. Can we find common spaces, where we are able to kind of aggregate this and allow people to have interactive dashboards to slice and dice this data and literally look into what's happening in the sector. But meanwhile, I think some of the challenges and barriers and perhaps things that we can address is, ours is one sector that doesn't have accounting standards. So whether if you're a trust in Maharashtra or Gujarat, you have a standard archaic format that's 50 years plus old to report. That is also needing to get revisited. But if you're a society and, there's no standard form of reporting your account, the Section 8 companies, which are a small percentage of the nonprofit community or the nonprofit population, the accounting standards that apply to corporates apply to them. So being a part of the social stock exchange advisory body, I've been kind of trying to request the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India to say that it's time that we have, standard ways of reporting our accounts so that we can start aggregating these numbers, or when we look into nonprofit accounts, we are able to compare them. Otherwise, we can't today. That's one of the difficulties. The other thing that the sector can do without depending on others, having looked at over 10,000 nonprofit documents very closely from a due diligence point of view with my team and I, what I think is that our accounts sit separately from program. So when I look at the accounts of a large organization impacting child health, I see one big lumpy item called program expenses. I'm not able to see, no one stops them from saying this particular program and the language of that program, if it said, this is to bring about awareness in health, So no one stops us. And I think if I'm not wrong, Aditya has a background in finance and accounts, if my memory serves me right. So if we are able to kind of spell out the terms that we use in our accounting expenses, if we are able to spell out our program expenses and call out our programs by terms that we use, which, the audit community, the CSR finance people, if they look at it, if it is self-explanatory. Otherwise, we have nice project proposals and then it goes to a different set of people to look at our accounts, and we are leaving it to them to decide what is program and admin for us. I'm saying, let us start having those conversations with our own internal teams, with our auditors of the organization. And so that when we put out these public documents, because, the rest of the sectors, whether it's government or corporate, will be most comfortable looking at our finance documents first. And if we are able to give them the language that they can make sense of this before even the accounting standards come in, I think we will do well for ourselves. I thought that is something that I should kind of call out as far as this is concerned. The other is, even in terms of for the trust and transparency bit, people want to know whose lives are we touching. So our sector pointed out that 70% NGOs or NPOs are working in direct implementation, and they are 94% of them are working with really the needy community, the underserved people or underserved geographies, right? But when we are talking in our pitch presentations or in our proposals, because we only know about our organization, we don't know about our sector or the other NGOs trying to do the same thing. We're not we are not in a position to say, or we oftentimes don't kind of bring the macro picture into it and give people a sense of the community that we work with. Now, again, borrowing what the social stock exchange is going to require of people is to say that.
Sorry, Pushpa, I'm sorry, but I'm going to come back to you on that. But there's a really important point you raised, which I wanted to bring Sanjoy in to talk about proposals and contracts. I think that's something our philanthropic community often asks of the nonprofit community. And I know Sanjoy wears a bunch of hats, including being founder director of the Salam Balak Trust. Sanjoy, what are some things that the philanthropic community can really do to help nonprofits, and some best practices? We've heard a bunch of best practices about nonprofit reporting, but what is it that the philanthropic community can really do?
I think taking from what Pushpa said, and, the report is really seminal, and I do hope that, we're going to make it available to everybody to read it. It's cross sectors. But like Pushpa said, when we're looking at development, as you know, Sneha, you can't measure it in these 3-year program periods that governments and corporates and philanthropy tends to look at. What can you do? What is the change that you can bring about in 3 years? Because in the first year, you're getting the program started, if it's a new program. The second year, you've just got into the groove. And by third year, you're saying that you need to wrap up or reapply. What I think is far more effective, if philanthropy and corporate is really committed to long-term change, is relook at this 3 to 5 year program. And I'll give you the example of the Azim Premji Foundation, which has in the past been supporting Salam Balak Trust and is one of our anchor donors. And what they've done now is that they've come back to us, and we're in our 9th year cycle, or our third 3-year cycle with them, where I think we're in our 8th year. And they've come back and said, hey, we trust you completely. And they did that after the end of the second 3-year cycle. And they said, don't worry about giving us your item-wise accounts. We're allocating X amount of budget for you. You spend it in areas that you feel appropriate, not necessarily because we bound you by that. So what we used to then do by the next phase was that we could move their contribution around. Do we need another fundraising officer? Do we need to invest in HR? Do we need more people in accounting? Can we upgrade our education program? So we could move the money around. But now what they've done, they've come back and said, hey, you're one of our trusted first partners that the Azim Premji Foundation funded. What we want to do is set you up with an endowment, use the interest as you feel best, and there won't be a grant any longer. Now you're talking business, because we know then that as an anchor partner at the beginning of the financial year, especially as accounting and taxation issues get even more challenging as government tries to control FCRA and the NGOs through local funding as well. We know that we're starting the year at a particular level, and we can only grow from that. And that gives you the sense of security for any establishment. And we are in a city, we're in Delhi. I've got long hair, I can schmooze. Who else can do that? In the smaller cities, in the villages, in the hinterland, they have no access. And it's really, those are the kinds of people who bring about huge amount of benefit and impact. Because even a 5% impact in a village in Uttar Pradesh is equivalent to a 90% impact everywhere else. You change those 5 lives in that village. Look at the kind of transformation you can bring around, whether it's in Orissa, in UP, in Telangana. But how do these people do it? They're having to struggle year on year to be able to get funds released by government, which happens typically at the end of the funding cycle, which is at the end of the year. And they have to survive. They have their children to send to school. They have their programs to run. And as Pushpa said, how do we ensure that the accounting process is transparent? To begin with, again, I will say that corporates and government have to understand that if you are putting money if you're bringing money to the table, please ensure that you do that well in advance of the program starting. You cannot expect an NGO today, especially in the hinterland, to be spending money. When you give them the money at the end of the year, what will that result in? Of course, you're going to fudge your books because you have no choice. So there's no point then saying that, oh, NGOs are like this. I'm sorry, NGOs are not like this. You are forcing NGOs to get into a situation where they're like that. And again, as Pushpa rightly said, in the report, what we are seeing is the largest number of NGOs are the small NGOs. And we know that the small NGOs at that very base level are being able to bring about much more impact because they're working at that grassroots level, bringing about much needed change.
Thanks, Sanjoy, for sharing those examples and best practices. I think along with funding, another thing we really struggle with in the sector is attracting the right kind of talent. Aditya, would love to bring you in at this point to share a little bit of, through the fellowship program that you also alluded to earlier. How have you really been able to foster, nurture, and really attract great talent and young people into the sector?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Sneha. The reality is that, the sector pays on average much, much less than any other sector, right? And it is difficult for people to transition to the sector. Everyone who's joining our organization has a job at Amazon, at Infosys, at Google, which is at least 1.5, 2x, or sometimes 3x of what they would otherwise be paid here. So I think wages in the sector for some reason are substantially, just become that this is going to be lower than, despite I need the same skills, I probably need even more complicated skills, but the wages are substantially lower than the corporate sector. So therefore you have to compensate. I mean, at higher levels, in fact, I tell people that whatever your tax amount that you paid last year, that will be your salary in this, when you join the NGO, right? Because on average, that's what happens once you're 10 years old. And this is sort of okay when you're, 23, 24, just come out of college, you don't have responsibilities, and you're sort of, you've not yet got married, you've not yet had your child. But as soon as you reach 27, 28, you're getting married, you're considering having a child. Now you start thinking, okay, I don't need very much, but the child needs a lot more. You don't want to deny your child anything that you got. So in fact, when I joined the sector, this is what my father told me. He said, listen, you can deny yourself whatever you want. Will you be able to deny your daughter what you got? Right. And so I think one of the key constraints in the sector is that we've just accepted lower salaries for some reason, while we're expecting greater accountability. So we definitely struggle on the talent side, but I think the compensation is in terms of mission orientation and values. And I think that is the key. Unfortunately, in India, as yet, corporates haven't yet figured out what is their mission. And so there are a lot of donkey jobs that people are not enjoying. So when they don't enjoy the donkey job, they have quarter life crisis, and then they come and join the sector. But that's not how it should be, right? I mean, all organizations should have missions. All organizations should have economically viable jobs and positions that we can work with. So today we are selling a dream, saying, okay, you are bored and sitting in Infosys and coding. Why don't you instead create a platform for adolescent girls? And the guy says, yeah. And he takes a 60% hit in pay and comes and works here. So today we are still selling like that. Or today we are selling, values, because you're saying, Acha, you work there and it was this thing. At least in the NGO sector, values, integrity between thought, speech and action is closer. But hopefully corporate India, is getting better and better at creating meaningful roles. And in that case, I really wonder who'll join the NGO sector. Because why should I take a 60% hit? Because Mahindra is a fantastic group to work for. Tata is a wonderful group to work for. Godrej is a wonderful group to work for. And they're also doing socially responsible stuff. See, 20 years ago, corporate and development were completely separate. Today, you can't separate them because you have to have a sustainable business. You have to treat your women in your workforce well. You have to have diversity and inclusion. You have to have a larger social mission, which means the corporate is moving closer and closer to this. And then the NGO is also moving closer, because previously it was only charity. Now you have to have some income stream. You have to be able to charge beneficiaries something. So the space is really coming closer and closer to each other, but the salary levels are just not coming close to each other. They're still, for some reason, they're stuck at a particular level despite multiple efforts. And I think that's going to be key. So today we are surviving because we're selling a dream, but I don't think that's sustainable.
Thanks, Aditya. I think you echo the sentiments of a lot of NGO leaders and community leaders here. And thank you for that candid sharing of information. I think with that, I'm actually going to ask Farida Ji. So we've heard about money being a problem. We've heard about regulations needing to change. We've heard about corporates actually needing to understand what the giving framework is. And then, of course, we've heard selling the dream is becoming difficult. But Farida ji, would love to have you share a little bit on what you are enforcing the future of the nonprofit sector in India, and then how does technology and some of these newer interventions really come into play?
I think I'm quite optimistic as a person. So I'm hopeful that civil societies will do even better. The challenge in terms of that who trusts whom, and that the government doesn't trust, and there are some issues right now as we are facing all the NGO sectors. I think there's no need to talk about it, but we know the narrative which is going on. Having said that, how do we put our house in order? And I think what I've just resonate what Pushpa said, and I'll also give you some of the challenges. As an NGO, as a non-profit organization, you have a vision, you have a mission. Our problem sometimes is with the corporates, with the CSR, in terms of funding, for example. And exactly what Sujoy said, that 2 years, 3 years, and then you have to, keep waiting whether you're the work that you're doing, will it be funded? That's one. Secondly, I think many of them do not understand that you need a vehicle to kind of implement your programs. And that vehicle is my staff, is my people. And if I don't look after my people and their safety and their security, how am I expecting them to even do things for others? And as Aditya was saying, that we do this only out of the mission and the passion, that each one of us have a passion that, I'm bringing the change. And every time you're successful, then your passion grows, like what has happened with me, right? But the staff that you're working with, the field level staff, the community based, whoever, even what Aditya was saying, everybody's needs are on an increase, and you're not able to match those needs because somebody else is paying you more. So I think one is that in the future we should start valuing our own selves, we should value our own skill sets, and we should demonstrate. The other thing I want to say is that I could completely echo with what Pushpa said, that when you look at program expenses, and we are having FCRA audits, we are having lots of audits, and one of the aspects that they bring out is that what do you mean by program expenses? And we are quite vague about it. So I think as NGOs, we need, as civil society people, we need a lot of trust, a lot of focus on our accounting practices, and in terms of transparencies. And whether we are small or big, that doesn't matter. I think what is important is that you're using money, you're using every rupee which has come to you, which is public money, which is donation. And I think we should be accountable for that. I think that is there. And lastly, I know we are running behind time. I just want to say one more thing, that as Preeti said, that as Pratham, we are also believing, and we are also coming to this whole thing that your community is very, very important. And COVID has taught us that. So the more you start looking at low cost models, the way you look at align yourself with already the government programs which are going on, money on programs might be even reduced, but one has to work it out. But for me, accountability, transparency, and your values that you stand for, I think are the most important. I'm sorry, I have to really go fast.
Not a problem. Thank you, Farida ji, for that optimistic note. I think you led me into the perfect cue to bring Preeti Tai in. Preeti Tai, communities, right? You've been championing the word communities through today's discussion, but the communities today face a lot of challenges. We've just come out of a pandemic, hopefully. We have a bunch of issues around climate. We have a lot of migration issues, and the area that you work in is directly affected and impacted by this. So what are the communities of today really asking for, and how can civil society at large really support the communities and the children really that form the pillars of those communities?
Yeah, thanks. But, I just want to go back to one thing that Aditya said, we are selling a dream. I think we should stop selling this dream, Aditya. That's really creating such a big problem, Aditya, because, somebody like, Prerna, when they apply, because we are selling this dream now, they think they'll go every day in the community and conduct a raid. The movie style, there'll be something happening in the court and they'll get justice. And, you know, when they come in contact with reality, oh my God, they are so disillusioned. And, you know, the reality is so different. It's so intense. To get one conviction is so much of follow-up and intense work. And then they realize they're not cut out for it. I know this is a little bit of hard talk. I don't know whether this is the platform, but you asked this question earlier and I'm venting. Anyway, going back to the communities, I think what communities really want is sustainable programs for them. Something that they can easily see. People are not happy migrating. You know, they want to be connected with their communities. They want to stay in communities. For example, let's again, you know, because child protection is what I understand. Children, you know, families don't, when families are in distress, they do not want to send their children to childcare institutions, but they have nothing local, homegrown within the community. We are not establishing community-based childcare services. A simple, I mean, I think it's simple. It's probably not simple, and therefore it's not happened. I mean, I would love a Parimal Foundation. I would love an Azim Premji Foundation to invest heavily on childcare support, childcare program, creches, drop-in centers in communities. It has such multiple potential. You protect the child, you ensure the development rights of children are taken care of, but you're also empowering women in the process. You're also, you know, supporting women to increase their own income, whereby, and we've seen time and again, you know, research and or no research, you know, just anecdotal, we've seen experiences in the community where women have said the minute her you know, income generating capacity increases, we find she's in a better position to negotiate. She's in a better position to ensure she does not experience violence. So I think communities more and more are asking for that. And of course, post-COVID, communities are asking for identity documents, for social security documents. They want to be linked to social security schemes. And even as civil society organizations, I think moving forward, there are these schemes there. And we've, you know, many of us have looked at the schemes. They really benefit the communities. I think we should work towards that. And wherever we feel these schemes have not been updated in terms of financial remuneration and reimbursements, I think it's time we advocate for that as well. So I know we don't have time, so I'm going to stop here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Preeti Tai. I hate to cut everyone here off, but we are at time. But I do want to leave a very quick line in for Pushpa to come in and talk about collaborations. You know, I know we are literally at time, but if you could quickly give us a line maybe as a takeaway. And for the rest of you here on the panel and in the audience, the report will launch soon. So the CSO at 75 report will be launching soon. So do keep a watch for that. And there is an end poll. So do, you know, give us your comments and recommendations. But yeah, sorry, Pushpa, quick line maybe on collaboratives. It's a long topic, but maybe we can have you close off.
Thanks. So maybe I will use, again, data point from this fresh out of, you know, curation, this whole survey report. So a lot of programs, you know, when I go, people just bash us saying the sector doesn't collaborate. Actually, our survey results showed that there are a lot of partnerships and collaborations, and we actually asked for collaborations that had a MOU signed, not an informal collaboration. And one, it showed that there are the sector actually has a lot of partnerships with government institutions to strengthen those institutions, to build those institutions, be it, you know, the PHCs or the Anganwadi programs, or even working with municipalities and the panchayats. For collaborations, you know, what are the motivations? So nonprofits said for capacity building of staff, they have done collaborations with businesses as well as amongst themselves. And to scale up, it's been with businesses, again, you know, within the sector as well as with government. But you know, I want to use this opportunity to just take one example and talk what is important to make these collaborations work and the results to show. Because in spite of so much collaboration, why are we said that this sector doesn't collaborate? I think we need to use standards for few things, like the example about accounting, the terminologies that we use. even certain standard terminologies for the communities we work with, because everyone uses a different term. So the details don't add up and we are not able to present this unified picture. And using standards will also help us become more efficient. So I'll take the example of the certification program that we have at GuideStar India to kind of improve or give a label towards the transparency accountability levels, which, you know, Dasra uses for a lot of its partners. And a few weeks ago, we were at Bridgespan talking about pay what it takes. So I think if I can only speak for what I've experienced, the standard around due diligence. Similarly, if we come up with common language, common ways, indicators for, you know, whether the activities, the inputs, the output, or the outcome, if we start using certain common language, common standard ways of measuring, then there are more efficiencies around it. We can add up. You know, I want us to stop saying each of us is unique. Yes, we are unique, but, you know, we can create subgroups within the sector. There are, you know, the ICNPO has got language around classifying our work. There are impact indicators put out in the the UN handbooks. And we as a GuideStar want to work with clusters of organizations in different thematic areas to put together this common language, at least around the indicators to measure, you know, our output and outcomes. So I think if we start using some of these, while it will retain our uniqueness, we won't depend on some outside agency to come and say, I want to cut you into 4 groups and you report. Maybe we will be able to say we are 40 or 450. And within that, these 2.5 lakh NGOs or 2 million NGOs are able to kind of say we fall into these clusters and this is how our nuances are different. But at least let's do that. And taking from Farida ji, who said, you know, let's put our house in order together. We are doing fabulous work, but let's start kind of communicating in some form that the rest of the world is able to see and understand.
Thank you. Thank you, Pushpa, for also doing that great closure of conversation. I think do watch out, everyone here, for the report that will be launched and available soon on the Dasra website, on the GuideStar India website, and as part of the CSO at 75 coalition. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the panelists, for being here and sharing your insights. I'm sure each of these topics we can go on for a couple of hours, but thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you, and lots of love to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Sneha. Thanks, Ami.
Yeah, for sharing.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Please wait,
Thank you.
participants. There is an exit poll, so do share that before you leave the screen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Pushpa. Thank you, Farida ji.
Bye.
Thank you, Sanjoy.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.